All of this should have led to immediate action, but once those findings reached the Privy Council office and the Minister's office, everything changed. ICED manipulated the findings, withheld the report from the public, and only suspended SDTC on a temporary basis with no plans to act against any single one of the wrongdoers, despite having overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
This is wild. This is worse than Arrive Canada.
What funding streams violated the contribution agreement between Sustainable Development Technology Canada and the government?
All of them.
I thought for sure that Arrive scam would bring down the government. I think it's going to be this one.
Minister Champagne has deliberately misled, or in your words, lied to Canadians and lied to committee.
Prime Minister Trudeau knows. Freeland knows. Champagne knows.
Exposing the systemic corruption with this failed Liberal government.
You have elected officials that are now complicit and ignoring their buddies, defrauding the Canadian government of hundreds of millions of dollars. This is huge, folks.
I'm having a hard time squaring your testimony with the conclusions of the review.
Give me an example where an organization has an amazing culture but then gets shut down.
The Standing Committee for Public Accounts met this week with explosive testimony from a whistleblower known as Witness 1, talking about the inner workings of the SDTC scandal. Unsurprisingly, there was no coverage of this by the mainstream media. The whistleblower has, for the first time, tied the scandal to a Liberal cabinet minister and the office of the Prime Minister. This will be a multi-part video, and we encourage everyone to watch, as this could eclipse even the SNC-Lavalin scandal.
Let's take a look.
A reminder that this committee has adopted a subcommittee report at our last meeting, and members have agreed to refer to this witness as Witness 1. I would ask that you comply with this decision of the committee. So without further ado, I will turn to Witness 1 for an opening statement. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak before this committee as part of your study on the Auditor General's report on SDTC. The release of the Auditor General's report in June concluded a 2-year effort I initiated to expose how SDTC's idealistic mission was co-opted by a group of corrupt executives, board members, and insiders within the clean tech ecosystem. All or some, there's a lot of speech here. Frankly, I'm embarrassed to be here because me being here is an indication that the systems that are set out to protect people don't work. That's the biggest issue here, and I'll continue on my speech, but I want to make it clear that I'm here not just for SDTC, but point out that this should not have taken a 2-year effort to get to this point. And even to this day, real accountability doesn't exist. The Auditor General's findings conclusively validated and vindicated every single one of the issues I initially raised. Within hours of the report's publication, the Minister dissolved SDTC. A clear indication of the severity of the misconduct, this decision should serve as further proof that SDTC was beyond repair, with corruption that was so badly ingrained that it rendered the organization unfixable. It also serves as the ultimate indictment against SDTC's leadership, who continue to work today. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Office of the Auditor General for its dedication to this inquiry and their wider efforts as one of the few independent institutions in Canada that continue to uphold public trust in a system that has become increasingly opaque and unjust. And just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement at SDTC, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization.
Wow, that's quite the scathing opening salvo there.
Yeah, and he's not even done.
No, he's not.
So this is, for those that may be new, we have a whole series on the SDTC scandal that you may want to watch through. If you want to binge watch some Northern Perspective on an evening where you have nothing to do, to catch up, but I'll try to summarize. So the SDTC stands for Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and it is an organization that the government set up back under Jean Chrétien, and its intent was to review potential companies or projects that are submitted to them for possible funding by the government to help kickstart them. And the focus on it was in the green energy and renewable energy sector. Probably a good thing. So the organization ran fine under the Liberal government that was headed up by Chrétien and Paul Martin. It ran fine under Stephen Harper, as there was an audit in 2017 that actually had given the SDTC a clean bill of health. So that was for the Harper period and a couple of years into the Trudeau period. And then in 2019, a new chair was appointed, and this chair was someone who gave thousands and thousands of dollars to the Liberal Party, became a friend of Justin Trudeau, went on a trip with him, as well as other women, down to Washington to visit the then President Donald Trump, and shortly after that was then appointed the head of the SDTC.
Now that person's name is Annette Verschuren. You may hear her name come up multiple times.
Right. And the other things that she has done is started a company called NR Store, which is a green energy company, or a green technology company. And she also has this center called the Annette Verschuren Center. The problem is... Is it the Annette Verschuren Center, or is it just the Verschuren Center? Because I thought it was named after her parents. Oh, it could be.
Yeah, I think it's just the Verschuren Center. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So the whole point is that projects are submitted, they're reviewed, and then they're evaluated by the board on what projects and companies get funding and how much. So the issue is that it was found, and this is what the whistleblowers were saying, is that the SDTC was greenlighting projects for companies that belonged to board members, which is a complete conflict of interest.
Oh, 100%.
So Annette Verschuren, the chair, different from the president, but the chair was found to have given her own company over $200,000 of money.
And there was recently a report by the ethics commissioner called the Verschuren report that said she was in violation of the ethics codes that govern MPs as well as appointed individuals within the government.
And we've covered this as well in a previous video. Now, the Auditor General decided to get involved with this because of all of the issues surrounding this, and the findings are staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars given to companies that shouldn't have received them. So the Conservatives have been trying to get to the bottom of this. Obviously, the Liberals don't really want this to come out. And you had this whistleblower that was behind the scenes submitting documents after documents, tape recording dozens of hours of audio with some of the people from François-Philippe Champagne's department. That's he's the Minister of Innovation, Science, Technology. So that was going nowhere. So now he's come back to committee. Now we've heard that some of the executives have resigned. The president resigned. The chair resigned. Champagne came out and did this big song and dance. Oh, we're gonna shut this down and everything. But money has still been going out the door.
And this is our money, folks. This is taxpayer money.
Right. So that's that's as much as I can kind of fit in here in a couple of minutes. But the other thing that you'll hear is something called the RGCT report, or the RCGT report. That's a third-party law firm that was commissioned when these initial claims of wrongdoing actually surfaced. So they hired a law firm to investigate themselves, and that's where a lot of this becomes problematic. And the Conservatives at the committee requested this report, but received it with redactions, which is very strange, because it's not like this company, it's not even a company, this organization is a private organization. There should be no reason for redactions in this if this is just a report investigating if there's any wrongdoing within the organization.
Well, I can think of a reason.
Well, there's no good and ethical reason.
Right.
So hopefully that's enough background on this. But if you want the full story, check out our series on this and watch it from the beginning. It's in a playlist on our YouTube channel. So let's keep going.
Again, I accepted this invitation to come to this committee because I'd like to talk about the actual effort that was required to get to this point, and what the continued lack of action by the federal government indicates about our society. Because the real issues extend beyond SDTC's collapse. The true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic systems and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. It should never have taken 2 years for the issues to reach this point, and what should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that allowed SDTC to continue wasting millions of dollars and abusing countless employees over the last year. The first government official that I approached was the Liberal Member of Parliament for Calgary Skyview, George Chahal, at an SDTC event all the way back in May of 2022. He assured me that he took this situation seriously and guaranteed that he would facilitate contact with the appropriate people in the federal government and the Auditor General's office.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so we're not even like a couple minutes into this, and he's already named an elected official.
That's a big problem. And he's one of, 2 MPs, Liberal MPs in the province of Alberta?
Yeah.
I don't think they have very many out in that province.
No.
So, I mean, this looks really bad already.
Well, and this is kind of what the Conservatives have been hunting for, because they've smelt this corruption leading up to elected officials, but they haven't found where that link is.
Yeah, they were looking for one with the Arrive scandal, but it sounds like the SDTC scandal is giving them exactly what they want, which is a link to the Liberal government.
So you have George Chahal, Member of Parliament, elected official. He has had a employee of the SDTC come to him with reports of corruption, conflict of interest, and wrongdoing. Chahal says, "I will act on this urgently." Okay.
His subsequent refusal to engage forced us to spend the next 5 months trying and failing to contact various agencies, including ISED, the Ethics Commissioner, as well as the Public Integrity Commissioner, to name just a few. It was only in December 2022 that I finally contacted the Auditor General's office, which set off a chain of events that finally culminated in the report in June.
Wow.
Okay, so on this note, Francois-Philippe Champagne has said many, many times in question period, the minute that he heard about this, the minute that his agency heard about this, they acted quickly. They acted immediately.
The moment we had allegation of wrongdoing, Mr. Speaker, we hired an independent third-party expert to investigate. The moment that allegations were brought to my attention, we launched a third-party investigation. The moment we heard of allegation, we commissioned to have an independent investigation. The moment we learned about the allegation, we launched an investigation. We launched an investigation. The moment we heard about allegation, we launched an investigation. The moment we received allegation, we started an investigation. I launched the investigation. Here we go. We started the investigation. investigation.
Maybe he has a different definition of quickly or immediately than most Canadians do.
Well, and meanwhile, you have this guy saying, I've been contacting people since 2022. This really only got going, I believe, in 2023. So this is a big problem. And interestingly enough, one of the only offices that he actually got any headway with was the Independent Auditor General's office.
Yeah, and like, I'm not laughing or smiling because I think this is funny. I'm laughing because I cannot believe this. Like, how many scandals are the Liberals going to have going at one time?
It took almost a full year after we initially talked to the MP that this file eventually ended up at ISED, who then hired RCGT in March 2023 to conduct a fact-finding exercise. This fact-finding was supposed to be a 6-week exercise with a simple goal to just validate the documentations that I had provided, with a stated guarantee that subsequent investigations involving the AG, ISED, and the RCMP would be initiated if any of those documents and allegations were proven true. By May 2023, ISED had already confirmed most of those allegations. RCGT had even drafted a report and provided a debrief to myself, with ISED bureaucrats stating their plan to make a recommendation to the Minister and PCO that the report be released and that at least 4 separate investigations be initiated and managed through a newly created office within ISED. All of this should have led to immediate action, but once those findings reached the Privy Council office and the Minister's office, everything changed. The investigation was delayed for another 4 months, allowing SDTC to continue misusing funds and mistreat employees, where at this point the federal government had in fact known that this was true.
That's really damning.
So PCO, Privy Council's office, that's the Prime Minister's guys, okay? So that means Trudeau knew. And this also means that Francois-Philippe Champagne knew. Now, you have allegations and allegedly proof now of the SDTC mismanaging these funds, engaging in misconduct, potentially engaging in fraud against the government of Canada by defrauding us of money, of taxpayer funds, and the government chose to do nothing. Allowed the organization to continue as is, to continue handing out money. This is crazy, folks. Remember, ArriveCan was around $60 million. We're talking now hundreds of millions of dollars going out the door.
Well, a net for insurance companies got, what was it, 200 million?
No, that was the entire bulk of the funds that the Auditor General found, of just the contracts that she saw. Her Versurance companies got, I think it was 200,000, but they'll get into this as we get further along. But we're talking tons and tons of money, folks. It makes the ArriveCan scandal look
like a drop in the bucket?
Yeah, like a drop in the bucket.
By late August, ISED now confirmed that no further investigations were required, and instead there were plans to release the report, suspend SDTC, and remove the board and executive team immediately. This was the outcome I was expecting, and I was satisfied that this situation was finally going to be resolved. Yet the minister and the government didn't act. ISED manipulated the findings, withheld the report from the public, and only suspended SDTC on a temporary basis with no plans to act against any single one of the wrongdoers, despite having overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The minister himself defended his inaction, stating that RCGT's report was inconclusive, but if anyone read the legal disclaimers that RCGT themselves had written in the reports, it would actually state the contrary. The report explicitly stated that none of the findings and work done by RCGT could actually be used to prove or disprove misconduct. This delay and lack of action again let SDTC continue operations unchecked and continue them to allow misuse of taxpayer dollars. At this point, the AG's office informed me of their decision to act, and in response, I made the decision to whistleblow a second time, this time publicly releasing recordings that expose ISED's deliberate inactions and falsehoods. The fact that I had to act again speaks volumes about the depth of corruption, not just within SDTC, but within the government and bureaucracy. The government's failure to act promptly or transparently is not just a bureaucratic failure, it is a moral one. These revelations triggered further inquiries.
Excuse me, Mr. Witness One. I'm going to have to stop you there because I think that's a good point. You're a little over your time, and I'm sure the members are going to have additional questions for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to the witness for being both present and for your immense courage bringing forward what is a terrible instance of gross corruption, conflicts of interest, disgusting corporate culture, to be quite frank, and serious issues relative to the treatment of staff at SDTC. The issues that I think are pertinent for my beginning round were related to the instances of the conflict of interest that you've brought up. You've mentioned several times of the severe conflict of interest pertaining to executive members. I also appreciate your opening statement in regards to what is a very idealistic mission, and one that I think many Canadians agree on, which is to support innovation and technology towards the better development of green technology, something that you yourself have contributed to in Canada, so I don't want to diminish that work. But of course, it's come at the heels of taxpayers. It's come at the heels of the trust that Canadians should have in their institutions. And now it's incumbent upon the government and members of this committee to try to pick up the pieces of what has been a really devastating blow to public confidence in this type of work. So I want to thank you for mentioning those facts. I do want to see if you can describe to me one of the examples you mentioned in earlier testimony in response to one of my colleagues today, related to when an executive takes a project. Let's say it's one of their projects. The normal process you mentioned takes 6 months between the time when an original application is submitted by a regular person, not connected to the executive. 6 months go by and maybe they're approved. The executive, when they want to have a decision, when they want to get support for their project, how long does that approval time take?
It might be faster. I think, again, like with regards to executives, a lot of times it was someone that was friendly with the executives, and that's why I mentioned, there is this inner circle of people that are above regular Canadians who are going through the regular process. When I talk about, some of these fast-track processes and issues like that, for certain cases, let's say it's, because a lot of times it was an executive that was purposefully helping a company connected to a board member. And when it was a situation like that, even in cases where, let's say, the project was rejected to the point where it was unfeasible to even take it to the board, a lot of those projects were then sort of kept in the background, and at any point they were suddenly reactivated. Whereas if someone who had a real project was rejected, they were specifically told that it is rejected and here are all the requirements you need to come back to apply. For other projects connected to board members, it was never the case of that. It was sort of, okay, let's wait 6 months and then we can just move it along or try to pick it back up. So timing is one thing, but a lot of it was a little more like that, where all of the rules that existed were good to ensure that everything was done correctly, but everything that happened that I'm talking about is more on the obfuscation of rules, and there's all of these ways in which you can manipulate but still pretend like you're meeting all of the requirements that exist. In other cases, when I'm talking about executives, there would be situations where an employee would write a specific finding or a specific recommendation that executives would actually change themselves. And they would then send that up to the board. So a lot of times, again, it's not that every person at the board level was corrupted. A lot of them were just, frankly, morons who didn't see what was happening.
To be frank, they're also complicit. Because they must have known about these things. They're members of a board. They would have been responsible, ultimately, for the decisions of the board, including instances where some board members were, of course, taking illicit contracts or finding ways to defer contracts to their buddies, correct? They're still implicated, correct?
Correct.
Wow, this witness is spicy.
Yeah, that's on parliamentary record now. Let the record show that the witness thinks that everybody on the SDTC board are morons. And you know what? He may be right. Because, you know, they don't bother looking. They don't care. They're just there for a rubber stamp. So the crux of what they're talking about is the normal process and time that it takes an application for funding to, you know, actually occur is around 6 months. And Desjardins is asking the good question of, is this faster if an executive wants it to be faster? And the answer is essentially, well, yes. And usually it's faster if there's people that are friends with the executives that want their companies to get funding. And when, you know, the employees of the SDTC are evaluating the application and putting their notes in, and, you know, maybe they have a finding being this is a concern or maybe a reason not to approve the funding, the executives may take it, change it, and then send it on up.
Well, and it also sounds like if it didn't pass the first time, they would kind of, you know, leave it to hang out and try it again in maybe 6 months and see if it passes then.
Yeah, let it lie low.
Yeah.
And then hope that nobody remembers seeing it. And then, you know, maybe they make another change and then shoot it up, and then everyone says, oh, this
what a
looks
brilliant
like
idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it seems like if you were just an outsider applying for this funding and you got rejected, that was it. It was done. You were rejected. No second chance.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, it's one thing to say, I forgot or I didn't notice, but when you agree to be a board member for SDTC or any GIC appointed organization or anything within the federal government, you actually sign a fiduciary obligation
Exactly.
to meet minimum requirements. And as much as everyone is still pretending like it was a mistake, we don't hold anyone accountable to that level when it's taxpayer dollars. And when we're talking about board members, you know, this is where it's a lot of mixed in situations where, yeah, executives would change things. Or let's say for a certain project, it was actually a not recommend from someone, which would effectively kill a project. Well, executives would supersede decisions or go to the actual external reviewers that were supposed to be independent and have them change their reviews. Or in certain situations, they would actually prevent the employee from speaking about the project at the board level, and they themselves would speak about it to make sure that they could tell the story that they wanted to tell.
So they'd be motivating these applications that were already reviewed under a regulatory process. They directly intervened in the decision-making and application process of their buddies to better leverage support for their friends' projects.
Across all stages of the process.
Across all stages of the process. Thank you very much for confirming that. My second point of this discussion is related to the actual work of employees. At the time, has there ever been, in your time there, you bore witness to or know of employees that were directed by executives to change or to manipulate aspects of an application that had already been denied?
Of course, all the time.
And what was the consequences for an employee who said no?
If an employee said no, it would be moved around to a different employee. So that's how the culture worked, right? There were obviously people brave enough to say no to certain things, and in a lot of those situations, executives would then move those projects to, let's say, an employee that was more agreeable to the executive. And how those employees benefited, well, they were the ones who got higher bonuses. They were the ones that would then get promotions. So this is where even at the executive level, or I would say employee level, you were benefiting from being more agreeable. And when I talk about, you know, the culture of fear, prior to myself being there, there was a major firing spree that effectively got rid of the majority of senior employees, especially as it relates to them who focus on financial compliance and all of these different key aspects that they were noting to be more and more problematic. So even prior to myself being there, there were already changes and things that effectively created an environment that would protect all of these issues, because anyone who would speak, they would know what was going to happen to them like others.
Sir, did you just say that environment already existed?
I'm afraid that is, we're well over. We'll come back to you.
Okay, so what Mr. Witness 1 is saying is even before he was hired and started at the SDTC, he became aware, well, after he joined obviously, of a house cleaning. Sounds like of senior employees that really understood the finances and how to evaluate these projects. And they're the ones saying, I don't think so. I don't think this is right. I don't think this is going to fit. So they weren't playing nicely with the executives. They were getting in the way of approving these projects. So they just said, you know what? We need to reduce some staff.
Well, and this is what happens when you have a extremely toxic or corrupt work environment. Either the good employees leave, either of their own volition or because they are fired or packaged out, or they become corrupt as well. Like, the whole organization needs to be corrupt in order for things to quote unquote work. So I'm not surprised that they were all exited from the organization, because it sounds like, you know, they were asking too many questions and knew the proper procedure for things and may have gotten in the way of the corruption.
And these people were probably the stopgaps to prevent these conflicts of interest from even happening in the first place. So once they're gone, the foxes are running the hen house.
So I'm going to ask you a set of questions. If you could be brief in your reply so we can get through them. You'll note the rounds of questioning are shorter now, sir. What funding streams violated the contribution agreement between Sustainable Development Technology Canada and the government?
All of them. The seed funding stream, the ecosystem funding stream, the startup funding stream, and the scale-up funding stream. I would mention that every single one of the seed funding projects did not meet any of the requirements, as did none of the ecosystem projects.
How much money passed through those streams?
I think it was over $50 million at least, but I think from the major findings it has to be over $100 million.
Were many of the companies getting funding through these ineligible streams conflicted and connected to political appointees, Liberal appointed board members?
I would assume so. I think anyone who would be appointed through the GIC process would effectively be appointed by the Liberal Party.
Are you aware of any new contribution agreements being made since the Auditor General report came out?
There has been an updated contribution agreement which now effectively goes back and retroactively allows for the majority of those ineligible projects to be considered eligible.
So companies that were in conflicts before or ineligible, they've retroactively made them eligible?
Through the update to the contribution agreement, yes, they would be considered eligible.
Wow.
Did I hear that correctly? That they essentially tailored the contribution agreement to make it so that these companies would pass?
Yeah. So basically, so one of the things that the Auditor General's report found was that a bunch of these funding applications that were made and approved violated the contribution agreement. So I guess the executives said, well, there's one way to fix that. We'll change the contribution agreement so they don't violate the contribution agreement anymore.
Again, just removing these safety nets, like these things that are supposed to prevent taxpayer money from going to people who do not qualify for it, or companies that do not qualify for it. And they're just taking them right out.
Like, this is unreal, folks.
This is not an accident, okay? You can't, tripping up the stairs, that's an accident. But this takes like multiple steps.
And these people that are approving these are all appointed by the Liberal government.
This is wild. This is worse than ArriveCan, and we thought that was huge.
Way worse.
That seems highly inappropriate, to say the least. Which of the Liberal appointed board members benefited the most from what we know to be $330 million tax dollars given out in identified conflicts of interest?
I would say the one that was most benefiting was Andre Lise Mateau, because for her, like, she worked at Cycle Capital and she had multiple companies within the SDTC portfolio. So for her, it wasn't a simple one company situation like Annette Verscher. And for Andre Lise, she was very friendly with the CEO at SDTC, and there were multiple instances where it wasn't just that she got preferential treatment for projects. She was getting funding 2 or 3 times where, your project gets funding and it's technically graduated, and then it would come back into the fund and get an additional round of funding, and it might happen a third time. So SDTC was effectively subsidizing companies for certain board members for years and years.
So I believe Mr. Witness 1 said this lady named Andrea Lees was with Cycle Capital. Now, Cycle Capital is an investment firm. Where else have we heard of Cycle Capital?
Oh, that's the one Gilbeau is associated with.
That's the one that Gilbeau is associated with.
Or was associated with? I'm not quite sure.
Probably still is.
Who knows? I can't remember off the top of my head.
And that's what he's been profiting off of. So isn't that interesting that now you have Mr. Green Minister with interests in Cycle Capital, you have the SDTC with somebody who also works for Cycle Capital handing out money for companies that no doubt Cycle Capital has investments in. Now, we had done a previous video on Mr. Gilbeau about him profiting off of the backs of Canadians with his investment interest in Cycle Capital. So, now we see who's been facilitating the money giving from the government to Cycle Capital, another Cycle Capital person. And Gilbeau worked at Cycle Capital for about 10 years prior to being in the government. So we see where all of this is now coming back around.
Well, and if you look on the website for the Office of the Ethics Commissioner, where the MPs have to list all of their assets and all of their liabilities and their spouse's assets and liabilities, etc., it lists Cycle Capital as a passive interest.
Right. So now how Stephen Gilbeau gets around this is he's not giving this company money from his agency. It's, they're getting money from a organization that is arm's length from the government, but still reports into the government.
Yeah, that doesn't seem kosher.
No.
Has the board of SDTC met to approve more money being given out?
I believe that there has been a project review committee meeting with the new board, which approved a new slate of projects to be funded this last week, I believe.
Are any of them conflicted?
I don't know.
So Trudeau's minister, Champagne, likes to exclaim quite loudly that he took action on the very moment that he heard about the problems at Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Is that true?
I would disagree with that.
Because the same conflicted companies then are still getting paid now. Is that right?
Exactly. The findings that were the findings used to suspend SDTC were known to the federal government all the way back in May of 2023. There was a 5-month period during which the minister's office and PMO knew that there was a significant level of conflicts of interest and a significant issue on ineligible projects. And during those 5 months, they did nothing to stop. And even after they suspended SDTC, the projects that were noted to have broken conflicts and were ineligible were still given funding even after SDTC was suspended.
Right. So we've heard, and we understand it, I believe it to be true, that the quote-unquote new SDTC is the exact same as the old one. And, I don't have any confidence that things have improved since the Auditor General's report. The interim board is now effectively in charge of its own oversight. Should we be concerned about how many more millions are being doled out improperly in the coming 6 months?
Absolutely. I think the biggest risk I see with the situation is the fact that SDTC is going to hire their own consultants to review how they fix the situation. I think they've mentioned hiring Deloitte to review how they've fixed the eligibility issues and conflicts. But again, I think we can all agree that none of the executives should have any say in what they've done and then have an ability to try and fix the situation. And Deloitte itself, any of these consulting companies, if we're being serious here, you can pay them to say anything.
You sure can.
Technically true, yeah.
You sure can, because you just give them the statement of work and saying, okay, so you're going to give me some recommendations. You're going to say I'm doing a good job, and that's what I need the report to say. They'll say, all right. Sure. and then off they go. So, and you hear some of the stuff like, okay, so the government knew in May of 2023, 5 months goes by, money's still going out the door, corruption still happening.
And Chahal was warned in 2022, was he not?
Yeah. But Privy Council office knows. That means Prime Minister Trudeau knows. Most likely Freeland knows. Champagne knows. You have elected officials that are now complicit and ignoring their buddies, defrauding the Canadian government of hundreds of millions of dollars. This is huge, folks.
This is huge. I thought for sure that a Rive scam would bring down the government. I think it's going to be this one.